Some languages treat possession as something you do. Others treat it as something that simply exists. In one system, you have things. In the other, things are merely with you. That contrast isn't just a matter of wording. It reflects different ways of organizing relationships. In music, tonal harmony solves musical organization by privileging a center, whereas modal harmony solves it by distributing stability across a field of relations. In this video, I want to show how similar organizational problems give rise to different structural solutions in both language and music. In linguistics, we can distinguish between languages that encode predicative possession using a verb equivalent to have, and those that express it through existential or locative constructions. In this video, I'll refer to these informally as have languages and be languages. In have languages like English, French, or German, possession is expressed with a dedicated transitive verb. The possessor is the grammatical subject, and the possessed entity is the object. Possession is treated as an action performed by an agent. In be languages, like Finnish, Russian, or Hungarian, possession is typically expressed through existential or locative constructions built around the verb to be. In Finnish, for example, in Russian, here the possessor is present in the sentence, but not as the grammatical subject. The possessed item occupies that role. Possession is expressed as existence within a domain, not as ownership enacted by an agent. Possession in be languages is not an action but a state of affairs. Something exists within someone's sphere. The key difference between have languages and be languages is one of syntactic alignment, how grammatical roles are consistently matched to semantic roles. In particular, how agency, subjecthood, and possession are linked within a sentence. In have languages, these roles tend to align. The possessor is a grammatical subject, the agent of the verb, and the center of the clause. In be languages, those roles are separated. The possessor is present, but marked obliquely as a location, a domain, or a reference point, rather than as the grammatical center of the sentence. This is what it means for the possessor to be structurally decentered. It participates in the sentence without organizing it. This difference becomes especially clear in how these languages handle absence and quantity. Finnish and Russian do not treat possession as a binary state, something you either have or do not have. Instead, they require speakers to specify how something exists in relation to a person, whether as a complete object, an unbounded quantity, or not at all. This information is encoded as degrees of existence using case, construction, and syntax. What is being claimed here is not that one system is more expressive than the other, but that they prioritize different kinds of information. Have languages prioritize who possesses. Be languages prioritize what exists and under what conditions. The difference in priority has consequences for how states, relations, and situations are grammatically framed. Now, let's move to music. In tonal harmony, musical space is organized around a privileged center called the tonic. This center is not simply the first note of a scale. It is the point against which all other pitches and chords are functionally defined. Chords in a tonal system do not have meaning in isolation. Their function depends on their distance from the tonic and the direction in which they tend to move. Dominant harmonies create tension precisely because they point away from the center, and resolution occurs when the tension is discharged through return. This is why tonal harmony is often described as directional. Progressions are not arbitrary sequences of sonorities. They are paths that move through varying degrees of stability and instability relative to a central reference point. Even when tonal music modulates, that is, temporally shifts to a different key, listeners rarely feel lost because the modulation itself is understood as a controlled departure and reorientation.
You're the only thing I see. Come on, baby, it's you. You're the one that gives your all. You're the one that always falls. When I need you, baby, everything stops. Finally, you put my love on top. Baby, you're the one that I love. Baby, you're all I need.
What remains constant is the principle of hierarchy. One pitch occupies a structurally dominant position, and other pitches derive their identity and function through their relation to it. Some chords are inherently stable, others inherently unstable.
It's a nice day to start again. It's a nice day for a white wedding.
And their roles are defined by the system as a whole, not by local context alone. In short, tonal harmony solves the problem of musical organization by assigning centrality and regulating movement around it. Modal harmony works differently. Rather than organizing musical space around a single privileged center, modal systems organize sound through contextual stability. Stability is not produced by moving away from and returning to a tonic, but by remaining within a defined pitch environment, a mode that establishes coherence over time. In modal systems, pitches and chords do not derive their identity primarily from their distance to a tonic. Instead, their function emerges from their role within the modal context itself. Characteristic intervals, sustained pitch emphasis, recurring sonorities, and limited harmonic movements. This means that chords do not belong to a key in the hierarchical sense familiar from tonal harmony. They emerge as locally stable configurations within a field, rather than as steps along a path of tension and resolution. Modal harmony is therefore not directionless, but non-directional in a specific structural sense. Musical time is not organized as a problem that demands resolution, but as a space in which relations are maintained. This logic also underlies what is often called musical impressionism. Here, impressionism does not describe a mood or aesthetic, but a harmonic strategy. Impressionistic harmony weakens functional relationships and treats chords as color, spacing, and texture rather than as vehicles for progression. Stability arises through consistency of harmonic environments, not through cadence. Common features include modal or non-diatonic pitch collections, extended and ambiguous sonorities, parallel or non-functional chord motion, pedal points, and sustained pitch fields. In structural terms, impressionistic harmony distributes stability across a field rather than concentrating it at a single center. This approach is especially clear in the work of one of my favorite artists of all time, Mr. Bill Evans. Evans' harmonic language draws heavily on modal scales, extended voicings, and subtle intervallic spacing. His chords frequently avoid clear root motion and functional cadences. Instead of driving toward resolution, they establish stable regions of sound.
The tune is called Nardis.
What makes Evans exceptional is not complexity, but restraints. Harmonic interest comes from small shifts in color and register within a sustained context. The listener's sense of coherence comes from remaining inside a harmonic field, not from returning to a dominant center. In this sense, Evans demonstrates how harmony can remain expressive and intelligible without relying on hierarchy alone. A closely related approach appears in the compositions of Wayne Shorter. Many of Shorter's pieces deliberately resist clear tonal orientation. Rather than establishing a key and moving through it, they often suggest multiple or shifting modal centers, rely on pedal tones, or leave functional relationships underdetermined. Shorter's harmony does not instruct the listener where the music is going. Instead, it defines an environment in which melodic ideas unfold. What makes this remarkable is that the ambiguity is structural and composed, not incidental. The music maintains coherence while refusing to privilege a single harmonic center. For listeners trained in tonal harmony, this way of organizing music can initially register as static or unresolved. But this reaction reflects an expectation of hierarchy, not a lack of structure.
It's a unique way of approaching the harmony, the same way that Wayne Shorter had kind of a unique approach to looking at life. When other people said this, he said that.
The music maintains coherence while refusing to privilege a single harmonic center. Modal and impressionistic systems solve the problem of musical organization by sustaining a field of relations over time, rather than by assigning dominance and regulating return. This difference will matter when we return to language because it mirrors exactly how B languages organize possession and presence without centering an agent. At this point, the comparison between language and music can be stated more precisely. In both cases, we are dealing with systems that must decide what occupies the organizing center and how other elements relate to it. In Have languages, syntactic alignment is tight. The possessor is the grammatical subject. The subject organizes the clause. Possession is encoded as a binary relation. This is structurally similar to tonal harmony, where the tonic functions as a privileged center, harmonic relations are directional, and stability is defined by proximity to that center. In both systems, meaning is organized hierarchically. In B languages, alignment is looser. The possessor is present but obliquely marked. Subjecthood and possession are separated relations. They are expressed without privileging an agent. This mirrors modal harmony, where no single pitch monopolizes structural control. Stability is distributed across a field, and musical elements exist relationally rather than directionally. Here, structure is not absent, it is distributed. The analogy is not metaphorical. In both domains, different systems solve the same organizational problem by assigning or withholding structural centrality. Russian doesn't just lack a neutral everyday verb equivalent to have. It also does not use the verb to be in the present tense. This typological difference becomes especially visible in translation. Imagine the vastly different experience you get from reading Dostoevsky in Spanish or Don Quixote in Russian. In Russian, many sentences simply place elements side by side, a person, a condition, a situation, without asserting ownership and without asserting being. There is no requirement to say that a character is something or has something. States can simply be present. That works naturally in Russian, but when you translate this into Spanish or English, you can't leave it like that. English requires a subject and a verb, and often resolves a sentence by introducing to have. Spanish goes even further. It forces an additional distinction between ser and estar. The translator must decide, is this a permanent or defining property, or a temporary or situational state? Is it something the character has? None of those distinctions are grammatically required in Russian. They are imposed by the structure of the target language. So the translator has to make a decision, not because Dostoevsky is unclear, but because Spanish and English do not allow grammatical underdetermination in the same way as Russian does. They demand commitment to possession, identity, and state. What changes, then, is not the content of the scene, but the grammatical framing of the experience. Russian allows conditions to exist without being owned and without being asserted as identity. Spanish through ser and estar already encodes a distinction between essential states and situational ones, but it still requires that the distinction be made explicit. English often resolves the same problem by assigning possession. Each language is solving the same representational problem, how to encode states and relations, by different structural commitments, not by stylistic choice. This is why translation is not just a matter of accuracy, but of stylistic and aesthetic choice. As translators must resolve grammatical distinctions their target language does not allow them to avoid. So in conclusion, comparing grammar and harmony reveals a set of structural commitments. Some systems organize meaning by centralizing it. Others allow it to emerge from context. Neither approach is more expressive or more truthful, but they train different intuitions about presence, agency, and coherence. Understanding that difference sharpens how we hear, how we read, and how we recognize the structures at work. To see that what once seemed immediate or self-evident really depends on the many possible ways of structuring and understanding the world.